Under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. This ends the reading of Communique number 1 from Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force.
6 hours. That was all it took for the ocean to turn red and entire units to vanish before they even reached the shore. Boats opened, and within seconds, men were cut down where they stood, dragged under by their own gear, erased before they could fire a single shot. This wasn't a battle. It was a massacre measured in minutes, and what really happened in those 6 hours is far more brutal than history admits. Before we uncover the truth, make sure to subscribe, because what comes next was never meant to be remembered. The plan had been built over months, refined down to the smallest detail, and carried on a level of secrecy that stretched across entire nations. Under the command of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Allies prepared for what would become D-Day, a coordinated assault designed to break open occupied Europe in a single, decisive strike. It was massive, precise, and believed to be unstoppable. Thousands of ships, endless columns of men, air support filling the sky before the first wave even touched land. Everything pointed toward success. Everything depended on it.
Claiming that D-Day is here, claiming that the invasion of Western Europe has begun. Let me read you something.
The strategy relied on overwhelming force. Naval bombardments would soften defenses. Aircraft would disrupt enemy positions. Paratroopers would land behind the lines, cutting off reinforcements and creating confusion before the main assault arrived. By the time infantry reached the beaches, resistance was expected to be weakened, disorganized, and scattered. That belief shaped everything, from the equipment carried to the speed of the advance.
28th Regiment was around Mount Shirabachi. H Company was somewhat in the middle of a broken line around the base.
The expectation wasn't just to land. It was to push forward immediately and take control before the enemy could react. But behind that confidence was a dangerous assumption. German defenses along the coastline weren't as fragile as intelligence suggested. Fortifications had been reinforced, hidden, and carefully positioned to cover every possible approach. Bunkers overlooked the shoreline from elevated ground, creating clear lines of fire that stretched across the sand. Obstacles had been placed in the water itself, steel traps designed to tear through landing craft in slow movement before boots even touched land. Every angle had been considered, every entry point anticipated. And then there was timing. Weather conditions forced last-minute decisions. Rough seas, low visibility, delays that disrupted coordination between units that depended on precision. Some forces landed off target, others arrived without support. The synchronized assault that had been planned began to fracture before it even reached the shore. Still, the order remained unchanged. The invasion would go forward because turning back was no longer an option. And as the first wave moved toward the coastline, packed into landing craft with no room to move and nowhere to hide, one reality began to settle in. This wasn't going to unfold the way it had been planned. The approach began in darkness long before the shoreline could be seen. Engines rumbled beneath the weight of hundreds of landing craft, cutting through rough, unpredictable seas.
Claiming that D-Day is here, claiming that the invasion of Western Europe has begun.
Inside each boat, men were packed shoulder to shoulder, their gear pressing into them from all sides. There was no room to sit, barely space to breathe. Helmets knocked together with every violent wave. Water splashed over the sides, soaking uniforms, adding weight that would matter later in ways few had fully considered. No one spoke much. Words weren't needed. The tension sat heavy, building with every passing minute. As the horizon slowly revealed itself, the shape of the coast came into view. At first, it looked distant, almost calm. But as the boats moved closer, details began to emerge. Dark lines along the sand, Unnatural shapes rising from the water, silhouettes that didn't belong to the landscape. Obstacles placed just beneath the surface waited silently, designed to rip open hulls or flip boats before they ever reached land. Some craft struck them without warning, jolting violently, throwing men off balance. A few never made it past that point, drifting helplessly as others were forced to move around them. The sea itself became an enemy. Waves crashed against the sides, rocking the boat so hard that many inside became disoriented. Some lost control, vomiting into the cramped space at their feet. Others tightened their grip on their weapons, trying to keep focus as the constant motion drained their strength. Equipment straps dug into shoulders. Packs grew heavier with water. Every piece of gear meant to keep them alive now felt like something that could pull them under. Officers tried to maintain order, shouting instructions over the roar of engines and the pounding of the waves, but even before reaching the shore, formation began to break. Boats drifted out of position. Timings slipped. Units that were supposed to land together were now scattered, separated by distance and confusion. The precision that the plan depended on was already slipping away. Then the sound started. At first, it was distant. Sharp cracks carried across the water. Then louder, closer. The unmistakable sound of gunfire reaching out before the landing had even begun. Bullets struck the water ahead, sending up small bursts that grew more frequent with every second. The shoreline was no longer a destination. It was already firing back. And as the boats closed the final distance, one realization became impossible to ignore. There would be no safe landing. The moment the ramps dropped, everything changed. There was no warning, no gradual escalation, just immediate, overwhelming violence. Machine gun fire tore across the front lines the second the first men stepped forward. Those at the front didn't even make it out of the boats. They fell instantly, collapsing into the shallow water or against the metal ramp, blocking the path for those behind them. The only way forward was through them. Panic spread in seconds. Men jumped over the sides of the landing craft, trying to avoid the gunfire pouring through the open ramps. But the water was deeper than expected. Heavy packs, weapons, and ammunition dragged them down the moment they hit. Some disappeared beneath the surface without a sound. Others struggled, fighting to stay above water as bullets struck around them, sending up violent sprays that blurred vision and direction. The shoreline felt close, but reaching it became something else entirely. Those who made it out of the water faced something worse. The beach offered no cover, no protection, just open ground stretching forward under direct fire. Sand erupted with every impact, kicking up dust and debris that filled the air with chaos. Bullets cut across the surface in long, controlled bursts, forcing men to drop instantly or be cut down where they stood. Movement became almost impossible. Every step forward drew fire. Every hesitation made survival less likely. It wasn't a fight, it was exposure. Officers were among the first to fall. Leadership collapsed before orders could be fully given. Signals were lost in the noise. Units that were supposed to move together broke apart within moments of landing. Some groups pushed forward blindly. Others stayed pinned near the waterline, unable to move at all. Communication between positions failed almost immediately, leaving men to rely on instinct instead of command. What had been planned as a coordinated assault became scattered survival. The noise never stopped. Gunfire echoed across the shoreline, mixed with shouts, explosions, and the constant impact of rounds hitting sand, water, and steel. The air filled with smoke and debris, making it harder to see, harder to think. Time lost its meaning. Minutes felt longer. Seconds stretched into something heavier. There was no clear direction. No visible path forward, only the constant pressure of fire forcing every decision. And as more waves continued to arrive behind them, stepping into the same chaos, one truth became impossible to escape. This wasn't just a landing. It was a killing zone that had only just begun. What waited beyond the waterline wasn't just resistance, it was design. The entire shoreline had been turned into a calculated killing field, every inch measured, every angle accounted for. At Omaha Beach, the defenses rose above the sand in layers, hidden within cliffs and reinforced positions that overlooked every approach. From those heights, machine gun nests fired in overlapping arcs, cutting across the beach in patterns that left no safe path forward. It wasn't random. It was controlled, precise, and relentless. The men below had nowhere to hide. Concrete bunkers were built to absorb direct hits, their narrow openings barely visible from below, but perfectly aligned to track movement across the sand. Inside, crews operated with discipline, firing in bursts that swept entire sections clean before shifting to the next target. Every time a group tried to move, the guns adjusted. Every attempt to advance was met with immediate response. The beach itself became the trap, flat, exposed, and impossible to cross without being seen. Artillery added to the chaos. Shells landed without warning, tearing through landing zones and sending shock waves across the shoreline. Explosions threw sand and bodies into the air, leaving craters that quickly filled with water and debris. Those craters became temporary cover, but only for seconds. They drew fire just as quickly, turning shelter into another target. The ground shook constantly, making it difficult to stand, let alone move with any control. Obstacles scattered across the beach slowed everything further. Steel structures, mines, and barricades forced men to navigate through narrow, dangerous paths while under fire. Engineers moved forward to clear them, often cut down before they could finish their work. Each delay added pressure, forcing more troops into the same exposed areas where the fire was already concentrated. The longer they stayed pinned, the more the situation collapsed around them. Medics tried to reach the wounded, but even that became a risk few could take. There were too many, too scattered, too exposed. Some crawled from one man to another, dragging them behind whatever cover they could find, while others were forced to leave them where they fell. The sounds carried across the beach. Calls for help, orders shouted without response, the constant echo of gunfire that drowned everything else out. Forward meant facing it head-on. Staying meant being slowly picked apart. And as the hours dragged on, with no clear breakthrough and no relief in sight, the men trapped on that shoreline began to understand something far worse than the fire above them. There was no way out. Pinned against the shoreline, the survivors were no longer advancing, they were enduring. Every movement drew fire. Every attempt to stand ended in collapse. The men who had made it off the boats now lay scattered across the sand, pressed behind obstacles, bodies, and shallow depressions that offered barely enough cover to stay alive for a few more seconds. Time slowed into something unbearable. Minutes stretched into hours under constant gunfire that never seemed to stop. Communication had broken down completely. Radios were lost in the surf or destroyed before they could be used. Units that were meant to coordinate their assault were now isolated, cut off from command and from each other. Orders weren't being given, they were guessed. Some groups tried to push forward, only to be cut down within yards. Others stayed where they were, trapped in place, watching as more waves arrived behind them, feeding into the same chaos with no clear direction. The plan no longer existed, only survival remained. The pressure began to build in ways that couldn't be controlled. Men ran out of ammunition faster than expected, forced to conserve every shot while being pinned under constant fire. Waterlogged equipment failed at the worst moments. Wounded soldiers called out for help that couldn't reach them. Medics crawled between positions when they could, but many never made it back. The shoreline filled with the injured, each one adding to the growing weight of what was happening around them. It wasn't just physical, it was mental. The constant exposure, the noise, the inability to move forward or retreat. It started to break something deeper. Some stopped trying to move altogether. They stayed behind cover, heads down, waiting for an opening that never came. Others began to panic, making sudden attempts to run that ended within seconds. Fear spread quickly, not as chaos, but as realization. This wasn't a temporary setback. It wasn't something that would resolve on its own. The longer they remained pinned, the worse it became. The enemy held the advantage, and nothing was changing that. And then, in the middle of that collapse, something shifted. Not across the entire line, not through orders or command, but through small, isolated decisions made by individuals who chose to move when everything said not to. Because staying there wasn't survival anymore. It was waiting to be erased. Then it started to change. Not through orders, not through strategy, but through moments no one had planned. Small groups began to move, not because they were told to, but because staying in place had become impossible. One man would break from cover, sprinting across open sand toward the base of the cliffs. Sometimes he made it. Most times he didn't. But when one moved, others followed. Not as a coordinated push, but as a chain reaction driven by desperation. Engineers were among the first to act. Carrying explosives through constant gunfire, they moved toward obstacles that had pinned the entire force in place. Some crawled, dragging charges behind them, placing them at the base of steel barricades or against fortified positions. Others ran, fully exposed, knowing there was no time to hesitate. Detonations followed, sharp, violent bursts that tore open narrow paths where none had existed before. Each cleared obstacle created a gap, and through those gaps, the first signs of movement began to take shape. There was no communication guiding it, no unified command directing the advance. Just fragments of units, individuals acting on instinct, pushing forward one position at a time. A soldier would reach a shallow depression, signal to those behind him, and hold fire long enough for others to move. Another would find a blind spot beneath the cliffs, hugging the base where enemy guns struggled to reach. Bit by bit, they began to climb, hands digging into dirt and rock, pulling themselves upward under fire that still rained down from above. The fight changed as they moved closer. The distance between them and the enemy closed, reducing the advantage of the defenses that had dominated the beach. Grenades replaced rifle fire. Close-range engagements replaced long bursts from machine guns. Some bunkers were flanked from angles that hadn't been expected. Others were forced into silence not through overwhelming force, but through persistence. Relentless, slow, and costly. Leadership began to reappear in fragments. Not from rank, but from action. Men who moved forward became the ones others followed. Small groups formed around whoever could lead them in that moment, creating pockets of resistance that pushed beyond the shoreline. It wasn't clean, it wasn't controlled, but it was movement. And for the first time since the landing began, movement meant something had shifted. The line that had been frozen in place was beginning to break. But every yard gained came at a cost that was already beyond recovery. And even as the first positions fell, the weight of what had been lost in those hours could no longer be ignored. By the time the first breakthroughs began to take shape, the cost had already reached a point that couldn't be measured in simple numbers. The shoreline was no longer just a battlefield. It had become something else entirely. Bodies lay across the sand in patterns that followed the path of the landing, marking where each wave had been stopped, where each attempt to move had ended. Equipment was scattered between them, helmets, rifles, packs, left exactly where they had fallen, as if everything had been frozen in place. Entire units had ceased to exist. Companies that had stepped off the boats together were now reduced to a handful of survivors, separated and disoriented, trying to find anyone still alive. Names disappeared faster than they could be called. Roll calls meant nothing. Command structures had been torn apart within minutes of landing, leaving gaps that could not be filled. The men who remained moved through a space where familiar faces were gone, replaced by silence where voices had been. The wounded were everywhere. Some lay where they had fallen, unable to move, exposed to everything still happening around them. Others had crawled toward what little cover they could find, leaving trails behind them in the sand. Medics worked where they could, but there were too many and not enough time. Choices had to be made. Who could be saved, who could wait, and who could not be reached at all? Those decisions didn't come from lack of care, but from reality. The situation didn't allow anything else. Time blurred. What had started as minutes stretched into hours that felt endless. The constant noise of gunfire and explosions never fully stopped, creating a pressure that made it difficult to think, to focus, to process what was happening. Some soldiers moved forward without fully understanding how they got there. Others stayed behind obstacles, unable to move, not from fear alone, but from the weight of everything around them. And still, more waves had come. They stepped into the same conditions, the same fire, adding to the numbers that had already been lost. The shoreline became layered with each arrival, each attempt to push forward leaving behind more evidence of what those hours had taken. By the time control began to shift, by the time the first defensive line started to break, the outcome had already been decided in another way. Too many were gone. And for those who survived, what they had seen in those 6 hours would follow them long after the battle itself had ended. Those who survived didn't carry victory with them. They carried memory. And that memory didn't fade with time. It settled in, quiet and permanent, replaying itself in moments they couldn't control. The sounds came first, the constant gunfire, the impact of rounds hitting sand, water, and steel. The shouts that were cut short. Even years later, those sounds returned without warning, as sharp as they had been in those 6 hours. Many struggled to explain what they had seen, not because they didn't remember, but because the words never felt enough. Conversations would begin, then stop halfway through. Details were left unfinished, replaced by silence that said more than any description could. Some avoided the subject entirely, pushing it aside as something better left buried. Others tried to describe it in fragments, moments disconnected from time, images that stayed fixed long after everything else had moved on. The shoreline never left them. They remembered stepping into water that wasn't clear, feeling the weight of their gear pulling them down while trying to move forward under fire. They remembered looking around and realizing that the men beside them seconds earlier were gone. Some recalled crawling across sand that offered no protection, pressing themselves into the ground as bullets passed inches above. Others spoke of the confusion, the absence of orders, the sense that everything had broken apart before it could even begin. What stayed the longest wasn't just what they saw, it was what they felt. The helplessness of being pinned with no way forward. The pressure of knowing that staying still meant death, but moving meant the same. The decisions made in seconds that carried consequences for the rest of their lives. Some spoke of guilt, of surviving when others didn't, of leaving the wounded behind because there was no choice. That weight didn't lift when the battle ended. It followed them back, settling into a silence that never fully disappeared. Official records would later describe the operation in terms of success. Objectives reached, positions secured, progress made. But those who were there understood something different. Those 6 hours didn't end when the fighting stopped. They stayed, repeating in memory, in silence, in moments that came without warning. And for many, there was no way to leave them behind. The outcome would later be called a success. The beach was secured. The line was broken. A path into Europe had been opened, and the operation would become one of the most significant turning points of the war. But that version of events only tells part of the story. Because what happened in those 6 hours wasn't defined by victory. It was defined by what it took to reach it. The plan had depended on precision, on timing, on the belief that preparation would reduce resistance to something manageable. But reality had been different. Defenses held stronger than expected. Bombardments failed to neutralize key positions. Landings were scattered, coordination broken before it could take effect. The moment the ramps dropped, the operation shifted from controlled assault to raw survival. And from that point forward, every gain came at a cost that could never be recovered. The success didn't come from the plan. It came from what remained after the plan collapsed. Small groups moving without orders, individuals making decisions in isolation. Momentum built not through coordination, but through persistence. The line was pushed forward yard by yard, not because it was meant to happen that way, but because there was no other option left. Failure wasn't avoided through strategy. It was forced back through endurance, and behind that, progress was the weight of everything lost. Entire units reduced to fragments, names that never returned, positions that were taken only after the ground beneath them had been covered with those who didn't make it. The shoreline itself became a record of those hours, holding the evidence long after the battle moved beyond it. It wasn't erased. It remained, marked by what had happened there. What history remembers is the result. What those who were there carried was something else entirely. Because those 6 hours didn't just decide the outcome of a battle. They revealed how quickly control can disappear, how fragile even the most detailed plans can be, and how victory can come at a cost that lingers far beyond the moment it's achieved. And in the silence that followed, one truth remained. Some survived the landing, but no one truly escaped those 6 hours.